Some moments in life are so unexpected that they change everything. This is one of those stories. I have replayed this day in my mind more times than I can count. I remember the way the light filtered through the curtains, how the room smelled faintly of lavender and something older, like books left open for too long. My aunt sat across from me, her presence always so effortless, so familiar. Yet on this particular day, there was something different about her. I couldn't put my finger on it then. But I see it now. She was a woman admired by many. The kind of beauty that made people take a second look, but it was never just about how she looked. She carried herself with a quiet certainty, an elegance that made you feel as if she belonged to a different time. To me, she had always been more than an aunt. She was someone I trusted, someone who always seemed to know the right thing to say. But on that day, as she leaned in slightly, resting her hands gently on the wooden table between us, her gaze settled on mine with an intensity one wasn't used to. I need you to do something for me, she said. Her voice was calm, even. But there was something else, something unspoken beneath those words. I remember the way my breath caught in my throat, the way time seemed to stretch in that brief instant before she continued. Because in all the years I had known her, she had never asked me for anything. Not once. I didn't answer right away. I could feel my heartbeat in my ears, an awareness settling in that whatever she was about to ask would not be ordinary. I could tell by the way she looked at me, how carefully she measured her words before speaking again. She was giving me time to process, to prepare. But for what, exactly, I didn't know yet. And then she said it. And everything changed. My aunt was the kind of person people gravitated toward without quite understanding why. It wasn't just that she was beautiful, though she was. It was something else, something about the way she carried herself. She had a presence, the kind that made a room feel smaller when she walked in, yet somehow larger at the same time. A quiet confidence that never demanded attention but effortlessly commanded it. I have seen her walk into a gathering where conversations were flowing, where laughter filled the air, and within moments, without a word, all eyes would turn to her. Not because she sought to be seen, but because people couldn't help but notice her. There was something deliberate in the way she spoke, the way she moved, as if every gesture, every glance had meaning. She was different from the rest of the family. Where others were loud, she was measured. Where others filled space with words, she let silence speak. My mother used to say she had an old soul, that she carried something within her that none of us could fully understand. I used to think that was just a poetic way of saying she was private, but as I got older, I began to wonder if it was something more. Growing up, she was always there, never intrusive, never overbearing, but present in a way that mattered. When I was younger, she would take me places no one else in the family ever thought to go. Antique shops filled with dust-covered trinkets, old bookstores where the scent of paper and ink felt thicker than the air itself, hidden cafes tucked into the corners of the city where she seemed to know the owners by name. It felt like she belonged everywhere and nowhere at the same time. She told stories, but never about herself. Instead, she'd tell me about the people she met, the places she had seen. And yet, in all those years, I realized something. No one really knew much about her. Not really. There were whispers, of course. Little things I picked up from hushed conversations between my mother and my uncle. Mentions of how she had once disappeared for months at a time, of letters she received from places she had never spoken of. And then there were the photographs, old, slightly faded images tucked away in drawers, always with people I didn't recognize. People she never spoke of. The family adored her, yet they also kept their distance. There was admiration, even affection, but underneath it, something else, something unspoken. My grandmother would always smile when she spoke of her, but it was the kind of smile that carried weight, as if behind the warmth, there was something she chose not to say. My mother, on the other hand, never quite knew what to make of her. She loved her, I know she did, but I could sense the unease in the way she talked about her, as if my aunt existed just slightly outside the realm of understanding. And then there was my uncle, who once, after a few drinks, said something I have never forgotten. He leaned in close, his voice just above a whisper, and said, "Your aunt, she was always meant for something else. Something bigger than this family." He never explained what he meant. I never asked. Looking back, there were clues. Small ones. The way she never really settled in one place for too long. the letters written in languages I couldn't read, the way she seemed to know things before anyone else did. And then there was that one conversation, years before she ever made her request. A conversation I didn't think much of at the time, but now I see it for what it was. We were sitting in her kitchen, a late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the wooden floor. She was making tea, her movements slow, methodical. And then, out of nowhere, she asked me, "Do you believe that some people are meant for things they can't explain?" I remember laughing, brushing it off, saying something about fate and coincidence. She just smiled, stirring her tea, watching me carefully. "One day," she said, "you might understand." I didn't understand then. But I do now. Because when she finally asked me for something, when she looked me in the eye and spoke those words, I knew. This wasn't sudden. This had been waiting. And I had been part of it far longer than I ever realized. It was late. Later than I had expected to be there. The kind of hour where time feels slower, where conversations stretch longer, and silences begin to carry more meaning. I remember the room being warm, the air thick with a scent of chamomile and something faintly familiar, something I couldn't quite place then, but now I recognize it for what it was. A moment on the cusp of change. She had called me earlier that evening, her voice calm, steady, with just the slightest pause before she spoke. "Can you come over?" It wasn't a question. It was a request, but one wrapped in something unspoken. I had heard that tone before, but I had never questioned it. Not until that night. When I arrived, she was already waiting. Sitting at the dining table, a single lamp casting soft shadows across her face. There was nothing hurried about her movements, nothing urgent. But there was something else, a carefulness, as if she was measuring the moment before it could be spoken aloud. She motioned for me to sit. I did. "There's something I need you to do for me." She said it simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. As if whatever words would follow wouldn't shift the ground beneath me. But they did. I waited for her to continue, but she didn't. She just looked at me, as if gauging something, as if waiting for me to acknowledge that whatever she was about to ask, whatever this was, it wasn't ordinary. I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. "What is it?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. She exhaled softly, tilting her head just slightly, her eyes studying mine in a way that made me feel as though she had already considered every possible reaction I might have. And then she said it. "I need you to trust me." Trust. That was all she said. No explanation. No preamble. Just that. And somehow, those words unsettled me more than if she had asked me for something specific. Because trust was not a task. It was not something tangible. It was a demand. I felt my fingers tighten against the fabric of my sleeve. "Trust you with what?" I asked. And still, she did not rush to answer. Instead, she leaned forward, resting her arms on the table, her expression unreadable. "There is something I need you to be part of," she said finally. "Something I cannot explain fully. Not yet. But when the time comes, you will understand." I didn't understand. Not then. And maybe that was the point. Maybe she knew that understanding would come later, when it was too late to turn away. But in that moment, all I had was her voice, steady and unwavering, and the weight of something I couldn't name pressing against my chest. I wanted to ask more. I wanted details, reasons, clarity. But the way she looked at me, it was as if she already knew the questions forming in my mind, as if she had already walked through every possibility of how this conversation might unfold. And yet, she gave me nothing more. "You don't have to answer now," she said. "But you will." The room felt smaller. The air, heavier. My heartbeat is steady but louder in my ears. And in that instant, I realized something. I had never once denied her anything. Not once. And she knew that. I nodded. Not because I understood. Not because I was ready. But because, somehow, I knew this moment had already been decided long before I stepped into that room. It stayed with me. Long after I left her house. Long after the last words were spoken. A weight that settled in the back of my mind, refusing to be ignored. I told myself I would think about it later, that I wouldn't let it consume me, but I was lying. Even in silence, it was there. I tried to go about my evening as if nothing had changed, but everything felt different. The way the light flickered against the walls. The way the air seemed heavier, like the room had shrunk around me. I kept hearing her voice, the measured tone of her words. You don't have to answer now, but you will. Why me? Why now? What was it she wasn't telling me? I needed to talk to someone. To say the words out loud. Maybe then they would make sense. Maybe then I would realize that I had overthought everything, that this was nothing more than an overreaction to a simple request. But I knew better. So, I called someone I trusted. A phone rings once. Twice. A voice answers, distant, casual, unaware of the weight carried in the silence before the first words are spoken. Hey. Are you free? The response is light, unbothered, the way people answer when they have no idea they are about to be pulled into something heavier than they expected. Yeah. What's up? I hesitated. And that hesitation told me everything I needed to know. If I couldn't even say it without second-guessing myself, then whatever this was, it wasn't simple. It wasn't nothing. I exhaled slowly, gripping the phone a little tighter. It's about my aunt. What about her? She asked me to do something for her. Okay. She wouldn't tell me what it was. Just that I had to trust her. That when the time came, I'd understand. And that was the problem. There was no reason. No explanation. No logic behind why she had chosen me, why she had waited until now. And yet, I knew it wasn't random. Nothing about her ever was. I don't know what to do. Has she ever asked you for anything before? I didn't need to think about it. The answer was immediate. No. And that was the part that unsettled me the most. Because if she had, even once, I could have dismissed this. I could have said that this was just her way, that she had always been like this. But she hadn't. Not with me. There was one thing. A shift in atmosphere, the sudden realization of something buried beneath the surface of memory. It was years ago, a conversation I had either forgotten or ignored. We were sitting by the old window in her study, the one overlooking the street below. She had been quieter than usual that day. Then, out of nowhere, she asked me, "Do you think some people are meant for things they don't fully understand?" I laughed it off, made some joke about fate and choices. But she didn't laugh. She just watched me, waiting. Then she said, "One day, you might understand." I hadn't thought much of it then. But now I wasn't sure. I had to see her again. The next evening, I went back. I didn't call ahead. I didn't need to. She was expecting me. She didn't seem surprised to see me. She just stepped aside, motioning for me to come in. The house felt the same as it always did, but I didn't. I was different now. A chair creaks. A cup is placed gently on the table. She waits. And then, finally, I ask, "Why me?" The question hangs between us, heavy, unspoken for too long. She doesn't answer immediately. Instead, she studies me, as if weighing whether I'm truly ready for what she is about to say. And then, in the quietest voice, she speaks. "Because it has always been you. You don't remember, do you?" Something in the way she says it makes my breath catch. I shake my head, but I already know I am wrong. I am missing something. And for the first time, I feel the weight of something far greater than I had ever considered. The soft rustle of paper. A drawer slides open. And then, she places something in front of me. A letter. Yellowed at the edges. The handwriting. Familiar. Too familiar. My own. A long silence. The sound of paper unfolding. And then, the quiet realization, this was never just about her. It was about me. And it had been, for longer than I had ever known. The letter was mine. My handwriting, unmistakable. The ink, slightly faded, but the words still clear. I ran my fingers along the edge of the paper, a slight tremor in my hand. It was old, years at least. But I had no memory of writing it. I looked at her. She didn't speak. She only watched, waiting. The soft sound of paper unfolding, a moment of silence before the words are read. It was dated long before I could recall ever sitting down to write something like this. Before I had reason to question anything. And yet, the words were mine. I know one day you will ask. And I hope when you do, I will be ready. I read it again. And again. The meaning slipping just beyond my grasp, like something I should remember but couldn't quite reach. I don't understand, I whispered, more to myself than to her. She exhaled softly, folding her hands in front of her. You will. A chair creaks as I shift, trying to steady myself, trying to find the right words, but they don't come. I look at her, searching for something in her expression, some hint, some explanation. But she gives me nothing. She wants me to find it on my own. Where did you get this? I finally ask. She tilts her head slightly, as if considering how much to say. You gave it to me. The words don't make sense. I don't remember. I would remember. Wouldn't I? I knew then that there were only two choices. Walk away, pretend this never happened, let the questions remain unanswered. Or stay, step into whatever this was, and accept that I might never see things the same way again. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe it was the way she looked at me. Maybe it was the weight of the letter in my hands, proof that some part of me had already chosen long before this moment arrived. Maybe it was simply that I had come too far to turn back. Tell me what I need to do. She nods once, then stands, moving with the same quiet grace she always has. Without a word, she walks to the cabinet in the corner of the room, the one I had seen countless times but never paid attention to. She pulls open the small drawer at the bottom, retrieves something wrapped in cloth, and places it gently on the table in front of me. I stare at it. My breath slows. She doesn't speak. She waits. My hands feel unsteady as I reach for it, unwrapping the fabric slowly, deliberately, as if my body already knows what my mind does not. The cloth falls away. And then, I see it. I feel the weight of it before I even fully process what it is. Not just the physical weight, but something deeper, heavier. The kind of weight that lingers, that doesn't let go. I look up at her. My voice is barely above a whisper. What is this? Her eyes soften, but there is something else there too. Something I cannot name. It's yours. I want to argue. I want to say that this isn't possible, that I would remember if it were. But the truth is, I already know she's right. Some part of me recognizes it. Some part of me has been waiting for this moment, even if I never knew it. I don't understand, I say again, but this time, I'm not asking for her to explain. I am simply acknowledging what I already know, that I will never see things the same way again. *L. She reaches across the table, places her hand over mine. You don't have to. I sit there for a long time, staring at the object in front of me, at the letter in my other hand. Two pieces of something larger, something that had always been there, waiting for me to notice. I think about the years I spent believing I knew everything about my aunt. About myself. And I realize, with a quiet certainty, that this was never about a single moment, a single request. It was always about something bigger. About understanding that some things are never meant to be explained, only accepted. I don't say anything else. I don't need to. I simply nod, letting the weight of it all settle into place. And then, without another word, she stands. And I follow. There are moments in life that refuse to stay in the past. They settle into the quiet spaces between thoughts, surfacing when you least expect them. Not as memories, but as something more, something unfinished. And no matter how much time passes, they remain. This was one of them. After that night, nothing felt the same. It wasn't dramatic or immediate. There was no single moment where the world tilted and changed. But I felt it, the way one feels the shift of seasons before the first leaves fall. Subtle at first. Then undeniable. I had done what she asked. I had stepped into something without fully understanding it, without the certainty I thought I needed. And now, I was left with the weight of it. For weeks, I tried to go back to my routine. The things that had once felt solid, conversations, places, even my own thoughts, now carried an unfamiliar edge. Like I was seeing them from a different angle, one I hadn't noticed before. I caught myself watching people more closely, listening not just to what they said, but to what they didn't. I wondered if this was what she had meant. If this was what she had been waiting for me to understand. I saw her less after that. Not because we fought, not because something had been broken between us, but because there was no need for words anymore. She had given me something, and I had taken it. That was enough. That was always going to be enough. Still, there were questions. Ones I never asked. Maybe because I knew there would be no real answers. Maybe because, deep down, I didn't want them. I had spent so much time searching for clarity, trying to fit the pieces into something neat, something explainable. But some things are not meant to be explained. They are simply meant to be lived. The last time I saw her, it was different. She was quieter that day. Not in a way that suggested anything was wrong, but in a way that told me she had said all she needed to say. We sat by the window, the same window where, years before, she had asked me if I believed that some people were meant for things they didn't fully understand. I didn't remind her of that conversation. I didn't need to. Instead, she reached into the pocket of her coat and handed me something small, wrapped in a piece of cloth. Lighter than before. Different. For when you're ready, she said. A faint rustle of fabric. The soft clink of something being placed on a table. I didn't open it right away. I waited. Not because I was afraid, but because I knew she wanted me to. And when I finally did, she was already gone. Inside was another letter. Shorter this time. Just a single line. A deep inhale. The words come slowly, carefully, as if being read aloud for the first time. You were always going to say yes. I don't know if she meant that as a statement or a question. I don't know if she expected me to answer it at all. But I do know this, she was right. Because some choices are never really choices. They are simply the moment we recognize what was always waiting for us. And this had been waiting for me all along. There are moments that refuse to fade. No matter how much time passes, no matter how much life moves forward, they remain. Not as memories, but as something deeper, something woven into the way we see the world. What happened that night, what my aunt asked of me, it changed something. Not in an obvious way. There was no sudden realization, no grand epiphany. Just a quiet shift. A knowing that had not been there before. The faint creak of a chair as someone leans back, lost in thought. I have tried to explain it to myself, to put it into words that make sense. But some things do not ask to be understood. They simply exist, waiting for us to accept them. I often wonder if she knew how often I would think about it. If she knew that, even now, I would catch myself reaching for the meaning, trying to pull the pieces together into something whole. But maybe that was never the point. Maybe she was only ever asking me to see what had been there all along. I never saw her again after that last meeting. Not in the way I expected to. There was no final conversation, no closure wrapped in neat, perfect words. Just that last letter, that last moment. And then, nothing. But she left things behind. Not just for me, but for all of us. Little things that went unnoticed before. Books with notes scribbled in the margins, old photographs with dates but no names, objects tucked away in places where they were not meant to be found, until they were. Some of them I understood. Others, I'm still waiting to. A soft rustle, as if paper is being folded, set aside. The chair she used to sit in is still there. The same place by the window where she watched the world pass by, where she spoke in quiet riddles that only made sense long after she had gone. I catch myself looking at it sometimes, as if she might still be there. As if I might turn my head and find her watching me the way she always did, patient, knowing, waiting for me to catch up. Some choices shape who we are. Some questions never get answers. But what my aunt asked me that day will stay with me forever. A final breath. The weight of the moment lingers. What would you have done? Let me know.